Good evening, everybody. This is Norberto Spangaro. I'm a director of the Doral Community Coalition. And tonight, what we want to share with you is an update of two very important subjects that are related to Doral, the city of Doral, and important to our residents. One of them is an update on Covanta and what has happened recently in the Commissioners Board of the Miami-Dade County. And then we'll have a briefing of the City of Doral budget that has been approved uh, by the council with not unanimously, but I want to cover that in some level of detail so you're all aware of what is going on. It's very important, the Covanta. It was a very important meeting. Our director, Yvette Gonzalez Petkovich, who has been attending the meetings and, as you know, has been very, very active on this issue with legal actions and contacts with all the parties involved, will give us a briefing on this very, very critical issue for the city of Doral. Good evening, Yvette. How are you tonight?
I'm doing very well. Good evening, Norberto, to you and everybody who's watching us this evening.
Okay, Yvette, I'll leave you on the stage. It's all yours.
Excellent. And so let's go ahead and put up our presentation so that we can follow it and our viewers can follow along. So as most who have been on top of this issue know, last week, Tuesday, there was a special meeting to address certain issues with respect to Covanta. And so pretty much all of the agenda items on this special meeting had to do with Covanta, and I want to address what some of those items were and whether they passed or not, whether they were voted on. So the first one, most of the resolutions were presented by Commissioner Bermudez. I believe it was 4 or 5 of them in total. And then there was one that was presented by Chairman Gilbert. So the ones that I'm going to talk about first will address what Commissioner Bermudez presented. So basically, the first resolution was a request or a resolution to support Mayor Daniela Levin Cava's recommendations 1 and 2 from the report that she issued back earlier this year about the different locations that are available. You'll remember that on that report, she identified the Opa-locka Airport West site as a new location that had been identified. At this meeting, it came out that this location was obviously on the radar of Arcadis when they first did the analysis. And for one reason or another, it was not presented. I know that Commissioner Bermudez had a big role in having this particular site considered. And in fact, his resolution, and we'll talk about it, pushes for it to be the number 1 site. So the first resolution this was approved was for the Board of County Commissioners to support, essentially adopt the recommendations of Mayor Levin Cava as it relates to an integrated solid waste plan. Also, on this one, this particular site had to do with using the Opa-locka Airport West site as the actual campus for this new project. There was a lot of discussion on this particular agenda item about the use of a campus. The discussion items has to do with, do we want a campus where there are multiple facilities and multiple processes going on that one campus where we centralize everything, or does it make more sense to have multiple locations, smaller sites where you address individual processes like sorting, recycling, etc. And so the idea of the county mayor here is to put to build a campus where there is, obviously they include incineration in every single report and every single memorandum that's gone to the county commission, but also sorting, recycling. There are all different types of processes that the idea is to put them all on that one campus. And so this particular resolution was a request for the county commission to vote to adopt the idea of an integrated solid waste program. All of that was positive. To adopt the idea of the Opa-locka Airport West site being used as a campus for this. And it basically the approval on this gives the mayor the go-ahead to issue solicitations, commence procurement, pursue finance alternatives, get the environmental approvals necessary for this particular location. And for the most part, this one passed without any issue. The next one is another agenda item that was on, and this is where Commissioner Bermudez asks the county commission to vote in support of Mayor Levincava's third recommendation in her report. And this particular recommendation had to do with the presentation of alternative waste to energy sites for preliminary permitting, regulatory review, and also to provide a report. So basically, in this portion of the mayor's recommendation, she brings up that obviously the Airport West site is the number one site as she sees it, but that also because of the complexity behind permitting, that there needs to be, and obviously complying with regulatory requirements, there needs to be two other alternatives because this is such an important piece of the county's waste policy, that we can't start with one site and then halfway down the road realize that the EPA or the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is not going to issue the permitting and the regulatory green light basically for that particular site. And so in this one, the idea is to adopt another two sites, which is the current Doral site and the Medley site where the landfills are currently at. And so this was adopted and it was approved by the county commission with one significant tweak, I think, for the residents of Doral. So Commissioner Bermudez wanted the three sites to be ranked, where the airport, Opelika Airport West site was number one. That's the one that was going to be targeted. And then as the first alternative, the Medley landfill site. And then as the second alternative, if the first two don't work, the Doral site. I think it was pretty clear from this meeting that Commissioner Bermudez does not want the new site built in the city of Doral on the current site. But of course, the mayor's report, there was some reason and logic behind it. And so the long and short of it was that this was approved by the county commission. However, Commissioner Gilbert, the chairman, gave a lot of pushback on ranking the sites. Commissioner Regalado, her messaging also seemed to suggest similar sentiments around the idea that they, this agenda item and voting yes on this was asking the county commission to make a decision on a site without having all of the information regarding that site and whether or not it was going to work. To that end, I thought that what was most significant in this for this agenda item was that Commissioner Bermudez was very adamant that he was confident and he wanted the commissioners to be on notice that he expected the city of Doral leadership, as well as, potentially the residents, to fight against placing the new facility in the city of Doral as much as they have to date. In other words, I think his messaging was like, you want to pick this site because you think that it might be the easiest route for purposes of permitting because it's been permitted this way for so long. But keep in mind that any value this site has on its history with this type of permitting could very easily be whittled down, and that value could be reduced immensely because of all of the pushback, the litigation, the activism, and all the work that has been done by the residents of Doral to ensure that this facility doesn't get built there. And I think the commissioner's point was, don't take for granted the fact that, the residents have been coming to you before this commission for so long, pressing on this. They're not going to give up now. And in truth, through the Doral Community Coalition, we actually filed a lawsuit against the county to prevent this from happening. And so I thought that that was a really important point that he made. And I think it's just further assurance that we have his support behind this, which is, I think, crucial in this process. Okay, and so for the next one, another agenda item that was approved was a resolution supporting recommendation number 7 for that was in the mayor's report. And this one was relatively simple, to the extent that the mayor in her correspondence made it clear that the county does need additional disposal capacity. We need to increase our landfill capacity in order to buy us the time necessary to build out this particular facility. I think it's very important for the residents to know that while this piece sounds, maybe as the least significant, it's actually a really crucial part of the plan in order for us as the residents who don't want this built in our city. I think it's important for us to understand that the county has to put the garbage somewhere. And so this was passed, this was approved, and I think it was a positive thing, because unless we have additional disposal capacity, I think that we're going to really limit the mayor's ability to make this happen, as well as the commissioners. It's going to be a much more difficult sale to them to put this elsewhere and to build this campus that's being envisioned if we don't have enough disposal capacity to help us deal with our trash until that happens. So that was passed. And as much as landfills are not a positive thing for the environment, for the county, the reality is that this was necessary in order to buy us the time so that we can really get this right, and for the county commission, obviously, to get it right. So the next resolution that was presented again by Mayor Bermudez was really just a resolution that gives a green light to establish this integrated solid waste management plan. And so with respect to that, that has a lot to do with obviously who's going to service this facility, whether it's going to be one company, i.e. Covanta, who it's always been, if the processes are going to be broken up, who else is involved in all of that. And so this resolution was presented by Commissioner Bermudez because it's sort of part of the whole plan. The mayor needs to have the ability to negotiate with some of the service providers and with all the different interested parties. And so this was approved, and there wasn't a ton of discussion around it. And so for the next one, the next agenda item was a resolution to support the mayor's 9th recommendation on her report. And this one is similar to the other one to the extent that it's about the solid waste management plan, but this was more specific to permitting. And it basically gives a green light to the county mayor to develop strategies to obtain federal and state permits for this new waste to energy facility, and then to generate a report as a result. And so I think this was also one that it needed to pass in order for all the other pieces to work. But as I will address from this point moving forward, I think that permitting at this point with respect to this facility is going to be a key issue for those who have been fighting this cause for as long as they have, and also for the residents of Doral. I think that the permitting is the area where we have the most ability to pursue litigation, to challenge where this facility is at, what is being built on this facility. And so if we can move to the next slide, wonderful. So I thought it was really important to dedicate one section of this update to the role of permitting in the future of the Doral site. So as far as, let's talk about the current site. And so, first of all, it's important for everybody to understand that the government entity that's determining what can be done on these properties, whether it's the one in the northwest side of the county, the Opa-locka Airport West side, whether it's Medley or whether it's Doral, it is the federal Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which is the Florida version of the EPA. They're the ones that are going to set the standards, and they're the ones that are going to guide the process. Now, when it comes to building these massive facilities, there is a lot of permitting that is required. For today's purposes, I wanted to hyper focus on the air permits that will be required to get this facility up and running, if it's ever going to be up and running. And I guess I'm referring to, if it does get placed in the city of Doral, where do I believe some of the weakest points are for the county in trying to get this new site permitted in the old location. And I think as it relates to the air permit is where we probably have the most to work with from a challenge standpoint. And so back in December of 2021, the coalition actually brought an action with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the FDEP, where Covanta had applied for a renewal of their air permit. This was before the lease ended. This was, very much, at the beginning of the intensity of this cause over the last 2 years. And so we went ahead and we filed a petition to challenge their air permit, basically asking the FDEP not to grant this permit, because in that particular petition, our primary focus was the age of the facility and how outdated and antiquated the facility was, including obviously all its infrastructure. And so the fact that it was so antiquated, we were able to make some very good faith arguments that the air quality for those surrounding this facility was compromised as a result of the antiquated facility. And so this particular action for us was pending. We were in discussions back and forth with the FDEP. They sort of serve as like an intermediary between whoever is requesting the permit, which in this case was Covanta. We don't necessarily deal with Covanta directly. It all sort of runs through the FDEP. And so while we were in the process of challenging this, there was a lot of sort of typical behavior that happens where there's an attempt at trying to reach an agreement, try to reach some concessions about how would the coalition dismiss their petition. What does the coalition want to see on behalf of the residents of Doral? And so much of that conversation was going on when ultimately the fire occurred. And so shortly after the fire occurred, it became very clear that there was a possibility that this facility would have to be rebuilt, at least significant portions of it. And so the coalition maintained its challenge on that permit until the FDEP notified us that Covanta was withdrawing the application. They weren't seeking a renewal of that permit because the infrastructure was destroyed. They were going to have to rebuild, and once they rebuild, then they would apply for a permit once again. So in the end, they withdrew their petition, their renewal application. Covanta did, and by virtue of them withdrawing it, then our challenge became what's called in the legal world moot. It was just a non-issue anymore because they weren't seeking the permit. The reason why I wanted to focus on this is because through our work in that particular case, I believe that the air quality and really hyper focusing on the impact of air quality, even if it's a brand new facility, the density that we have around this the Doral site is very, very dense. It's highly populated. It's very concerning. And so my thought is that we as residents living within a mile or 2 miles of this facility, we have the strongest standing at the administrative level with the FDP and the EPA to challenge any efforts, any permits that are presented to approve, the building of this facility, but specifically as to the air permit. Plus, the experience that we had with the fire, there have been numerous testimonials, both at the city level and at the county level, and then in private settings, about how this fire impacted so many in this community. And so I am incredibly optimistic that if, for whatever reason, the site that the county commission chooses to go with ends up being the one in the city of Doral, I really think that we have a lot of opportunity to challenge this and really rise to the occasion with respect to what Commissioner Bermudez stated, which is, we've been fighting this for a long time. We're not going to let it go. We're not going to take our foot off the pedal. And then finally, on this slide, you'll see other permitting. I want to make certain that, whoever's viewing this understands it's not just an air permit that needs to be secured in order to build a site like this. There are numerous permits, and, whether or not there's an opportunity there to challenge what's happening remains to be seen. But because the coalition has direct experience challenging the air permits, I wanted to bring that up. And anybody who is interested in this concept, I urge you to look up Title 5 of the Clean Air Act. That is the law that regulates the emissions from facilities such as the one that we're looking at, and ensures that air quality control requirements are properly applied. And so, if they choose if they choose Doral as the future site, rest assured you're going to be seeing a lot more of, I'm certain many of the residents have been active, but without a doubt, the Doral Community Coalition, because we fought them on this issue already once. And I know that it's a strong issue. My communications with the FDP make it very clear that this is crucial for them. And I think that'll be a route for us. I think we might have one more slide before we wrap it up. All right. So I spoke about the agenda items that were presented by Mayor Bermudez. I'm sorry, by Commissioner Bermudez. It's hard to break old habits. There was one resolution, however, that was presented by Chairman Oliver Gilbert. And so Chairman Gilbert is the equivalent, basically, of Jose Pepe Diaz, Commissioner Pepe Diaz, from back then, meaning from a year ago. And so Oliver Gilbert presented a resolution where he is requesting, or, he's basically stating that if Doral does not want the facility built in the city of Doral, and they want it essentially moved, then Doral needs to absorb some of the cost and the funding necessary to relocate these operations, subject to board approval. And in presenting this, basically, Chairman Gilbert is saying, okay, City of Doral, you initially, his item indicated that the City of Doral had 30 days to negotiate with the county the terms of this. I will tell you that by the end of this meeting, it became very clear that Chairman Gilbert recognized that 30 days was incredibly burdensome. Commissioner Bermudez also brought that up. 30 days to negotiate something of this nature was really incredibly unreasonable. And ultimately, it was discussed that it may be something closer to 90 days. And so that was one of the primary points that were raised. Ultimately, this did pass, and so where we stand with this is that I think that this was the most scandalous, if you will, of the discussions that were had, because on top of what Oliver Gilbert is requesting, they want basically for the residents whose property is within a mile of the boundaries of the current facility to pay essentially a tax, whether they call it a tax or some other form of collection of monies. They want them to pay a portion of it. At this, the way that this special agenda item passed, it was 3.5%. But I think that the way it was written was incredibly ambiguous. It's difficult to be perfectly clear exactly how they're going to calculate all of this, and exactly what the 3.5% is from. And so I think what's clear is that the way that this was presented, there was a lot of pushback on the details behind it, but it seemed that generally what was approved here, without a doubt, was the idea that Doral residents needed to contribute in some way, shape, or form monetarily to the funding for the new facility if they want it to be built outside the city of Doral. I think that we can do an entire webinar on this particular agenda item. I think what's best is, to just sort of see exactly the details of it and how it plays out. And I do want to comment. Obviously, I'm out and about in the community on individuals who have been very active on this issue. And I think it's been very interesting to see the community's reactions. Naturally, many, gave a lot of pushback, concern. I mean, the fact that it would be perpetual, in other words, forever, the properties within a mile would be contributing to this, when, obviously this has been here for 40 years. The residents of Doral have endured, the negative impacts of this all these years. And now we have to somehow pay in order not to endure those negative impacts. Some of the rationale behind all of this was, I think, very insensitive and disconnected with what's really going on in Doral and why we're so against this facility. I don't know if Commissioner or Chairman Gilbert has made his way to the facility yet and has had the opportunity to meet a lot of the residents who have been impacted by this. But I think on the one hand, there's been pushback. I think on the other hand, I've seen that there are residents who sort of understand the idea of having some skin in the game, because we are the ones that have been pushing this, and some variation of this might make sense. The issue, as I see it, is the way that this particular agenda item was drafted. It doesn't give, I don't think it gives the city enough guidance on how to explain to its residents exactly how this would work. And then some of the terms of it are really just incredibly burdensome, like the perpetual nature of this, meaning forever, seems incredibly unreasonable. The limited amount of time to negotiate these things. And so this one kind of came out of left field for us. And rest assured that the coalition will be on top of this particular item, and we will do our best to exploit everything that is wrong with it. And if there is a sweet spot to find ourselves in where it makes sense to the grand majority of those impacted by these monies and having to contribute these monies, we will find it without a doubt. And so, for the most part, Norberto, that's it.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions, Iber, if
Okay.
you allow me. I know Vicente and others have been asking it. Number one of the things that I think comes clear, maybe is the plant has been closed.
Yes, and I should have included that in this because that's a
The
huge
plant has been
one.
closed. Therefore, this is not a discussion of, and it was very clear that it doesn't make any sense to reinstate the plan in whichever capacity because it doesn't make any business sense.
Norberto, if I may, because I think it's really important for the community to like, I think it's important to manage expectations and to make certain that they understand exactly where we are at. So, yes, the plant was officially closed, right? Because it cost the county about $1 million a month to keep this
Right.
plant open when it's not really doing anything. And so, yes, they decided to close it because of those numbers. However, that doesn't mean that this site is off limits to build
Correct.
the new
But now,
facility
but now,
in the
correct.
future.
But now, the side of Doral as well as the other two sides,
Hmm.
and eventually those two sides can be challenged, and the three sides can be challenged. And but now Doral location as well as the other two locations are on equal foot.
Yes.
So if they decided to move it based on all the discussion that happened, for instance, distance to the residential areas, blah blah blah,
Size.
you name it, Doral is in equal foot. Like like somebody from Miramar was making questions about it. That means that that decision is not going to be based because Doral doesn't want it. That decision is going to be based on another factor. So the only reason, I mean, I'm talking about this resolution of Chairman Oliver Gilbert
Hmm.
was the most nonsense discussion I have seen in a while. Probably the only nonsense that it was worse than this was when less than 9 months ago, about a year ago, they approved in 3 minutes without
Hmm.
any discussion to keep the plan in the route. That will go into history. That will go into history as the most dementia, irresponsible decision that an organization like this one has taken. But anyway, what I'm saying is this discussion will continue. Because let
Right.
me, and you didn't mention it, Yvette, but I want to mention that the discussion was that if the plan moves, the values of the property will go away. Well, the only person who probably has the authority to say that is the tax adjuster, is Joe Garcia.
Right.
Because I'm adding to your comments of this is that's such an issue. Number two, if the properties go up, who is the first beneficiary?
The county, because where are the
They're
taxes
gonna
that
get
we
the
pay are
taxes.
going to go up.
They're gonna
Exactly.
get
So
the
it's
taxes.
almost like a
So
double taxation, right?
exactly.
So,
So
right.
as
And
I've said, if somebody who lives about a mile from it and builds a swimming pool less than a mile today and builds a swimming pool, the property value will go up.
yeah, but how do you know it went up because they moved the facility,
And
or it went up because
when I show the budget now, you're going to see that. So uh, this was a discussion of resentment, in my view,
and
of people who
politics,
have made some
Norberto?
politics. So uh, I think that the two important things is that this has been closed. There is a solid waste issue that is very complicated, as you will say. Many people would like to have no solid waste and create a no plan. That is impossible. That's why the landfill. And probably one of the discussions that needs to happen in the future is we got to do a better job in recycling and managing the waste in general. But I
And
think it was a big progress, and we got to thank. And hopefully, in a week or two, we're going to have Commissioner Bermudez go over it because it was very clear, Yvette, and you are very experienced at that, much less than I am. But it was very clear that the people who were involved and attended those meetings learned how difficult it was for J.C. Bermudez as a commissioner to deal with this unit that is the board of commissioners, and how successful he was. So we got to really thank the incredible job that Commissioner Bermudez has done to put us into this position, which is substantially better
oh,
than
without a
where we
doubt,
were about a year ago. But the fight
yeah,
continues. This is a long way. You talk about permits. I heard in the meeting that they were talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 years dealing with the permits. Is that correct?
So historically, that is absolutely possible. That's why there's a lot of talk about, let's not just pick one site, let's do a preliminary assessment to see if we can get an opinion from the experts of how long it's going to take us to permit certain areas. And listen, Roberto, I know I don't want to take up too much more time, because I want you to go into the budget as well. That's a really important topic. But I do want to state something. When you talked about, we need to get better at recycling, one of the things that I'm seeing, and I think it's important for everyone to know, is, I think this is an opportunity for the city of Doral to lead by example. And so if we were able to have sort of quantifiable evidence that we as residents have gotten better at recycling, composting, whatever combination of environmentally friendly habits we've adopted, I think that would go a long way in this fight. I mean, this fight, we're in it for a few years, by the way. And so just like we like the status quo right now, we were fighting before to change the status quo. Now we like the status quo, and we have to fight as much as possible to maintain the status quo, but also help get what we want for the future. And so I just wanted to make that point, because I think residents should be even more motivated now than ever to become more environmentally conscious, because we want to lead by example. And Norberto, it's so frustrating. Even after all this time, we still get the arguments up on the dais that all these people moved into this area knowing that incinerator was there. And it's so like naive for them to speak like that, because they don't even know half of the details of what these people were told and what the expectations were, whether they were true or not. You're muted. Oh, so
That is between the private sector. But on the other hand, all the zoning of that area and the approval of
right,
those buildings were done by the county at that time, because they retained that ability when they gave that land to the city of Doral. So it was
they
not
ignore
city of
that
Doral
fact.
responsibility. Exactly.
They
Well,
ignore
Yvette, I think that was great. I really appreciate it. I know this is your child. You have been carrying the fight for a long time, and I got good news and bad news. You have made a lot of progress. The bad news is
there's
this is
more work
just the beginning. This is
to be
just the
done.
beginning.
Listen,
Well,
I just want to say that last week was really a big day for the city. I mean, Norberto, you know how much we've spoken to people for a long time. People thought we were crazy, we were wasting our time. Absolutely, they patted us on the back. Go for it, give it a shot. But very few people believed in this, and it's so incredibly rewarding to see that if you are persistent, you will persevere. And I think this was a great example of that. And hopefully we can use these experiences for any other issues that are a big deal and a big impact to our community.
thank you. Well, thank you very much. We're going to go through the budget, and I'm going to invite you to join me, Councilwoman Digna Cabral. I know she was the negative vote on the budget. I'm going to be covering very briefly, Digna, the numbers in generic terms. We're not going to get into too many details, because the coalition has been involved in looking at the budgets for, since probably 10 years ago. And the fact is that we look at trends, tendencies that are like yellow lights that are alerts that we are raising every time that we see a trend, something that we should be worried. We are not inside the city. We're not going to debate whether the police or this unit or the other unit spend more money than it should. There are some generic comments we're going to make, and some generic trends that we're going to raise that are of concern of us. So with that, I'm going to go into this. Interesting what we were talking with Yvette about the value of the properties. This is a chart. This is all extracted from the City of Doral's website. You can have all the budget there. And if you look at this number, I'm going to mention because it's small, I got to get closer to the computer. In 2014, the value, the ad valorem of the properties in Doral were $15 billion. Is that billions, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
And in 2024, the value of the properties in Doral is double, 30 billion dollars. So it would be very interesting to demonstrate this trend when they said that it will go even further with with a plan outside of Doral. But this shows what has happened in the city of Doral. At the same time, the tax is a millage rate is applied on the value, so we get our taxes, we get our money. As you can see, the millage rate has been going down and is flat in the proposed budget that has been approved uh, recently. The fact is that when you increase the base and you maintain the rate, your taxes in terms of the actual value of the taxes will go up. So the city will be receiving more money.
More money. Yeah.
Exactly. And interesting to see that even when look at 2021 and 2022, uh, and 2020, 2021, 20, that's the pandemic. That's when we were under the COVID restrictions. So the city never suffered really from any decrease in values of any tax issues, thanks God. But they were very, very well prepared. What did happen with this is the cost of living. And of course, as we all know, some of the big projects have faced the increase in cost. I'm going to go into more detail with this. Just look at this. In 2021, the revenues of the city were $66 million.
Mm-hmm.
In 2024, the revenues of the city are $64 million as a proposed budget. So we are really getting, a very nice increase in the revenues. And the way the budget is done, you deal with the revenues and then you go into your expenses, how you spend the money. Of course, the revenues are higher because there are also reserves and there are other sources of revenues. When you really look also at federal funds and other stuff, the total revenues of the city is around $100 million, $105 million. That is the size of our city. But directly related to taxes, permits, etc., it is $77 million. Very interesting. You see how we have, and this is a consequence of the pandemic and everything else, is how permits went down in 22 and 22, 23, because that is the extent of how the COVID has restricted activity and the level of activities were substantially lower. But now we are back. I don't understand. There is a number here that to me is dubious. Why permits are, excuse me, are 1,000,007 when we reach 2,000,004 this year, 2,000,006. So hopefully it will be less construction. How the expenses, we were $60 million in expenses in 2021. We are now $77 million in expenses. I'm going to show percentages, but if you see, we were 5 million better than the revenues. We're now flat to the revenues. That's usually happening in the budget. You spend all the money, but you really, hopefully you want to spend, but we were creating reserves. When you don't spend all the money, what happens is you're reserving for the future. One of the things that happened, and we said that years ago in our discussions, when always presented is, and we all know in life, there are economic cycles. There are issues now debating whether we're going to be in a recession. South Florida, including the city of Doral, has been living through what I call, a dream situation, which is huge revenues, high price increases in the last few years, but the economic cycle may turn around. We might have a recession. We have a lot of immigration from inside the U.S. because of the tax situation, but the cost of living and what we have seen in the latest report, people are leaving South Florida because of the cost.
Yeah.
So, like anything in life, when you're doing well, is the time you got to save. And I got to say that also because we, the Latinos in general, when we do well, we spend the money. And that's how Latin America is where it is. So this is the time to be prudent when you can be prudent, not by force, but you can be prudent because of your intelligence, you know what you're doing. And I'm going to go into more details on this because there is a concern. The concern is that if you look at the revenues, and the revenues by taxes, they have increased from 2021, 15%.
Mhm.
However, and I'm going to go into the next slide, expenses have gone up 31%. Okay, that's important. That's a number that is huge. Now there are expenses that are not related to the daily activity, like we are paying the interest on the bond and so on and so forth. But the expenses are going up, and that's we got to be very careful. And there are some expenses that are really concerned. They can be small in the total. They can be small. We're not going to be talking today because I don't think we are prepared. Why? Look at that. We were spending 25 million in police. Now we're spending 33 million in police. We're not going to debate whether we have enough police or we don't have enough police. We are not into those details. Uh, However, I think when we are reaching this level of increase in expenses from 58 million to 76 or 31%, in all the departments, there is a time to start doing benchmarking and understand. I check on other cities. Of course, every city is different. Every city can be discussed how they use the resources, how they don't use the resources. But for instance, in the case of the police, I have seen that some cities have much less bodies than we have. Should we? Shouldn't we? I don't know. But I think we should do benchmarking. And one of the things I notice in the budget, there is always representation of why to increase the expenses and how their performance is. Doral was extremely good at the inception of the city and in the first 8 years to have a very good management information system by which they will perform based on objectives and a clear definition of those objectives. I got a concern, and I'm going to raise that concern because I see increases like in public affairs, in city manager, in city
Yeah.
that are huge.
Yeah,
And
so that's one of the things that, well, first of all, thank you, Norberto, for the invitation. Always the coalition, it's a great entity for so many years. I mean, since the foundation of the city, where you all have gathered together and have been fair with everyone. I mean, no matter what, who is the one that is leading our community, if there's something that you see that it's not looking for the well-being of the community, you have been always been there to be a voice for all of us. Also to Yvette, thank you so much for her explaining what happened in our county, and also, like always, to our commissioner, thanks to him and the voice of so many of us that has always worked together in order for us to have the best results when it comes to this. So yes, this was a milestone. I mean, the coalition, I know that for years you've been working very closely with the county and with the elected officials. So thank you so much. But going back to the budget, yes, it is something that I express. I know that is being posted there, that the celebration of the budget that is being approved. But I wanted to make clear that I voted against it because I have many concerns on how things are being handling, especially that many of the things that I see, like you mentioned, for example, when it comes to the public affairs department, the increase that we saw there it is over 41%, and it doesn't look good, especially on election year, that we are increasing to those numbers when we look into the traffic, if there being any changes of how actually we communicate with the community, there's haven't been really any changes there. So when I asked what's the reason of the increase, there's no explanation. Every time I ask a question, and I ask questions when it comes to the budget, and like you mentioned, I mean, when it goes to contractual services, and that's something that I also explained, there's being an increase of over 227%. And we're talking over 228% increase compared to last year. And then you question, I mean, okay, we actually we're through a pandemic where we saw so many increases when it comes to contractual services in order for us to be able to have many of the projects already completed, or that we were in the middle of it, especially after the pandemic. So what is the excuse right now? Why do we have to increase to that amount? Also on the promotional activities, like you were mentioning, we're talking about almost a 29% increase. So we're talking from 62,000 to 85,000. And also something that really concerned me is that under the mayor, there being more people that are being hired to assist the office of the mayor. And I says the office of the mayor because even though it's under the mayor and council, this person has not served to any of the other rest of the elected officials. And the other thing is that our city manager, I mean, we have city manager, we have deputy, and they have an assistant that she is, let's say, like a secretary that she works with both of them. And now we add two more positions, a clerk and also another person that is going to be also working very close to the city manager. And we're talking that we're paying the city manager over 300 something thousand a year, not counting all the benefits. And then you're adding more personnel. I mean, when I question her, okay, what is the reason? Is it that the I mean, my question with her was like, don't you feel capable of running the city? And I asked her this because I understand that she was a director of parks, but I have worked with three different city managers since I was elected. And I can tell you that they did a great job. The time that they left, I can tell you that the budget, there was no issue because the budget was audit. And there was no issue in the audit, even though that was used a lot during campaign. And those are the things that really bother me because I always say, put the facts there. Show me the facts. If we did something wrong, if we're working in the wrong way, show the facts. It's not just I feel saying something because it really hurts the reputation of the people, like in my case, that have decided to serve our community, always looking for the well-being of all of us. And not just because I have a personal agenda. And everybody that knows me knows that is the reason that I decided to run. Decided to run to be able to represent my city. I am also a resident for so many years here, and I have devoted myself not at the time that I decided to run. Way before that, I decided to serve my community. But there are many different points that you brought up that are very important for the residents to look into it. And that was the reason that I voted against, because there were many points that were not clarified. One of them, for example, that they actually explained to me that they decided for us not to pursue on keeping our certification with the World City Council data. This is an entity that help us to analyze and compare, not just at the state level. We're talking way beyond national, globally, our city with the services that we're provided, and compare with the amount of residents that we have to in different stages. So they decided, and that the cost was around $40,000. We were the only city in the nation that had all three certification. And this certification was something that attracted so many businesses from not just nationally, but also international to establish in our city, because with the collection of all this data is that we're able to give a better service to our residents. So we were not just collecting data just to have it there. No, it's to see, okay, how we can improve our parks, how we can improve our roads, in conjunction with the county. So this is so much valuable information. There are other cities that are paying over $100,000 just to have this certification. And the reason that I was given by the city manager and the finance department is that they don't see any value on it. When right now, everything that has to go with technology, I mean, we're talking about artificial intelligence. And you're telling me that gathering data for us to give a better service to our community and to compare the way that we're governing to other cities or other countries, actually countries, you're telling me that that's not valuable. So I really don't understand right now what it is. I mean, we had a meeting where we all got together and we talked about what are the points that we need to achieve, or the for this year within this budget. And we have the opportunity to express and say, okay, these are the goals that we need to accomplish for this coming year. But here, really, the reflection of this budget, what reflects to me is that the goal is to promote the office of certain elected officials and to add more staff to be able to help our city manager, that I don't really think, even though I vote for her, because I believe that everybody should have an opportunity to prove themselves, that she's not really ready for this position, that she's not capable for this position. One example is that every time I meet with her and I have my agenda review, there's nothing that she can contribute to the agenda. I have the deputy who reads the agenda to me, and then I have all the different directors, even though I had or not a question. So I don't agree with increases that we have here, and thank you for bringing this up and
Yeah,
to set already some of the examples.
yeah, we are in the coalition. We are not inside, so we don't know what is going on. So we're not going to judge on the individuals. What we are giving
Mhm.
perceptions and trends.
Yes.
My feeling is that first, when you talk about, and I have been involved from many years ago on certifications.
Mhm.
Uh, you can argue that it's a stamp, but that stamp comes always after a commitment. If you're not committed to the process, being that an ISO, whatever process it is, that means that the certification for you doesn't have any value. So the risk is that it's not really a certification, that you're not committed to the process. And that's
Mhm.
very dangerous. What I see in a lot of these expenditures is I have seen a lot of activities to promote the elected officials. And I'm going to generalize all and you're an elected official, so uh, excuse me for this, but I think that when I comment on the cost of our city in terms of the city council, the city man, and the public affairs, it means to me that there is a lot being done to promote the individuals.
Yeah.
And I would like that we spend the money in promoting our city because the city is well above any individual. I don't care who is in the city. The city is the city, and Doral is on top of any individual sitting in the dais. And that's what I see in this trend in the budget. Very concerned. And though in terms of the big numbers, this is not going to change the life of anybody, but this is a trend. The organizations are like human beings. Unfortunately, I got to say that because when you grow older, you start getting fat in your belly and everywhere else. The city of Doral has passed the teenager time. Now is an adult. It's over 20 years, and we can be building fat. And let me give you an example of what I'm saying. But before, I want to mention something. If you look at the expense, I always mention this, and I remember years ago in one of the reviews when I think Boria was the manager, the
The
mayor.
mayor. Hmm.
I always said one thing, which I learned in my 40 years experience in running businesses. You got to keep your personal cost under control because you can do anything else with the operating cost. You can cancel contract and maneuver. When you're talking about people, you got to be lean. You got to be extremely careful. Look at this chart, and I hope the slide that I see here, you don't see it, is total departments expenditures. And I'm not talking about intergovernment and other stuff. This is the money spent, is $77 million. We are spending right now, out of the $77 million. Let me get into my chart because I cannot see it in the computer. I think it's 52 million, right? 51.9. That means 67% of the total expenditures right now are in personnel cost. It would be interesting to go and see, for instance, the city of Weston, who has outsourced a lot of activities, how different it is. Now, and that includes some expenditures that are in both in police and information technology, which are basically capital investments, or we are paying the interest of the bond. So our expenditures are very people related, and we are increasing the headcount a lot. I think the city should be careful with these. Be always careful about increasing your fixed cost in terms of personnel.
Hmm.
And we are going through a different world today, and suddenly if we had a good retention program, we should have very experienced people. We should increase productivity every year. But I will alert to be extremely careful, and also how we measure. And I'm going to go into public affairs. I pick up public affairs as an example because there is one thing interesting, which they justify their activities. Now, I'm speaking as a resident. I'm not involved in what you were mentioning, what they do, whether they talk to
Sure,
you
sure,
or
sure, sure, sure.
not. And I said, well, how we justified 1,000,000 too? And they said, well, we got 80,000 followers in social media. What does it mean to me as a resident?
Mhm,
I mean, what does it mean? I mean, I heard that Messi, our new star in Florida, has about 30, 40 million. So I understand for him, he may be selling shirts and whatever. But what does it mean? What are we spending here? We were spending $867,000 to have 68. We got now 18,000 more. Should I take the difference of almost $400,000 and said, well, gee, this 20, what does it mean?
mhm,
We made 179 videos a year. That's, the views. What are the views? What does it mean? Interesting, because they got projected 2 million, now 1 million too. What does it mean? Because it will be interesting if you tell me that people come to view because we get a lot of complaints, because permits are not coming. What do they view? What are we getting from it? Positive media. Yeah. So
yep,
what? And facilities coordinate. Look at this activity report, and what does it mean in terms of the expenditures for the resident of Doral, for us, for us.
mhm,
And that's what raised a concern to me in the way we're managing it. So here is another one. We're going to spend postcards in instead of the full newsletter, whatever. I mean, this is how we're going to spend the money. Uh, so this is an example. And as I said, the city is not going to go broke from this, but it's a trend. And I think we got to really look at the trend. You know, I worked 40 years looking at the budget. And I tell you, the
mhm,
truth of the matter is that you go up and then you got to come down, then you go up and then you got to come down. But I think it will be sensitive for the city to manage the fixed cost and the staff cost. If we need more police in the streets, that's great. Let's put more police in the streets. That should go with the people. Okay. And the same thing with public works. There is also a huge increase. I didn't want to get into every department because, as I said, that called my attention, which is in planning. I know we are fantasizing on planning, and we have seen charrettes and things like that were really interesting, but no effect to the residents and not value. So I will question that department. What do they do? If theoretically we have a city that has been well constructed, there's no much more room for big permits. We are not going to be, hopefully, even in this administration and the next probably administration, they won't be involved in permittings with Covanta because I won't be there. And
mhm,
hopefully, it won't happen. So why do we spend so much money? So we live in a country that needs to be careful about the expenditures of the government, and that starts from Washington, goes into the state, goes into the county, and goes into our city. But we are too far from Washington. We are too far from Tallahassee, and we are closer to the county, but not that close, the city. So I will recommend that the city takes seriously the managing on the expenses. I have seen increases in the expenditures of the council. I have seen grants given to people who presented projects. I went into their websites. There is no project behind it. I know these are grants given to friends and family. This is
correct.
serious. This is a serious.
Yes, and
I can
foundation, the
demonstrate it
thing,
with
the
facts.
things
I
that
can
the same
demonstrate it with facts. I
the same thing
remember
that we used to see, from before, from the
I
from
remember that
yeah,
over 80 years ago, I was sitting there when they wanted to have the council going to a dinner, a dinner for some charity. And I said, I pay for dinners for my charities, not for your charities. Don't do it with my money, my taxes. The city is doing well financially. The city it will have challenges because of the cost of Florida. So this is the time to behave rationally and be careful. It's political. We all who have a lot of relationship with Latin America know what politics are. And frankly, I don't want Doral to be a city of Latin America in terms of managing the government. That's what I'm questioning. So with that, I want to thank you, Digna. I want to
No,
thank Yvette.
thank you.
I want to thank Yvette for all the job on Covanta. This is gonna be put in the social media. We're gonna distribute it, and hopefully we'll do something for the better of our city, like we all intend to do. Thank you very much, and have a very good night.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you to all. Many
Thank you,
blessings.
Councilwoman.
No, thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.